for being here tonight because we have a great competition in this design week. There are like about 10 events every night. So thanks for being here and choosing us. In the mid-century years, Danish modern had found its way into the millions of homes across the Western world, shaping the lifestyle of well-educated Danish middle class and the taste of Americans and British away from antiques and into the modern. Danish modern became the blockbuster of the furniture industry and the preference of the young generation during the post-war years. In its heyday, it was perceived as the ultimate combination of fine craftsmanship, honest approach to materials, simplicity, harmonious integration of form and structure, and functional, good, democratic design. Danish modern was placed on the world stage and received enormous coverage in local and international exhibitions and fairs from Copenhagen to Milan to London to New York. It was constantly featured on the covers of the finest magazines, and it was a new hot thing for all baby boomers' parents who wanted to live stylish. This evening, come to celebrate Danish modern and to illuminate on its current state and identity. This event is sponsored by Brun Rasmussen Auctioneers and will be followed by a Danish-style reception. So I would like to introduce the speakers from Copenhagen. Peter Kjeldgaard is the head of modern design at Brun Rasmussen Auctioneers. James Amite is curator and director of museum relations at R & Company, and Vance Trimble, collector, expert, and interior designer. So thanks for being here, and we're going to start. Peter, I want to ask you first, what are the characters and values of Danish modern?
If I should make one characteristic about Danish design, I would say it's about craftsmanship. This is what makes it stand out in comparison to most other design movements of the same era. There was a guy in Denmark, there's a curator at the Design Museum, he made a very good sort of illustration of that. He said if American design is about business and German design is about science and Italian design is about art, then Danish design is exactly about craftsmanship. So that is the defining character, in my view, of this of Danish design.
Vance, you are creating interiors, and we see here two of them, and you have been known to use the finest examples of Danish modern. What type of values do these pieces bring to the interior space today?
Well, when I approach an interior design project, I always think about the mix of objects I can use in furniture, and I find that the historical Danish furniture always adds something to the room that I can't achieve by buying new pieces. It has this very unique quality of being historical, being modern, and being extremely well made, all at the same time. And it really, particularly in the area of seating, I think just is unmatched, and its presence, its comfort, its quality.
James, you are an expert in mid-century, and I want to ask you about America. The mid-century years were particularly rich in development in American design and with many exhibitions, and yet Americans were crazy about Danish design in the mid-century. Why?
Well, the Museum of Modern Art played a huge role, of course, in promoting Danish design, in that they started to, in the 1940s, include Danish designers like Finn Juhl and Hans Wegner in the various kind of competitions and exhibitions that were this good design concept that was about, promoting a modern outlook, but also affordable and something that could easily be, obtainable as well in terms of purchasing these pieces from department stores and things like that. And so one of the things that's always been fascinating to me is that obviously America has this rich history of collecting Danish design from the very moment that these pieces were first released and first exported here. And so, you know, I've been to so many different interiors where I would go on a house call when I was at Sotheby's, and I'd get there ostensibly to see American mid-century furniture, to see either American studio furniture by Nakashima or by Wendell Castle or by Paul Evans, or to see American mid-century modern furniture by Eames, by Saarinen, by Nelson, by Noguchi.
Peter, Danish modern had its moment in the 50s, but then it faded completely. When did you start recognizing its comeback?
Well, my background is actually that I was studying political science, and I was starting to get interest in this mid-century period back in the 90s when there was really no one that was interested in it, in Denmark at least. So I would go around and I would see great Hans Wegner pieces or other great designers, and you could buy them for, if not pennies, then a few dollars. So this was mid-90s, and that was the first time that I sort of sensed that there were some people that were starting to take a real interest in this. There was a growing market for it, and then it sort of expanded ever since that.
So mid-90s.
Mid-90s.
Were you one of these dealers? Is this the one you referred to? Okay.
There's a few dealers in the audience, actually. Some really important ones, actually, going way back to that period.
It's a huge honor. It was called the Pacesetter House Program, and it was initiated by the House Beautiful legendary editor, Elizabeth Gordon. It tried to introduce a new way of living modern in post-war America, but unlike the Case Study House Program, it was something that actually criticized Orthodox modernism and offered livable spaces for Americans. And Danish modern, as well as Frank Lloyd Wright, were the stars. So Vance, I want to ask you, why did Danish modern fell out of favor? It was so popular in the 50s and 60s here.
It became super popular. Everyone had to have it. And I think partly it suffered because of its popularity. And eventually, in the late 60s, you could buy it at Sears, and through catalogs, you could buy the American version of Danish Modern. And I think it just sort of became so popular and so watered down over the years that it imploded, and people just thought it was representative of sort of post-war design, and they wanted to move on to something new, and it collapsed and disappeared. And
That's really, so it's overexposure. People got tired of it. James, you have been a part of this entire rediscovery of mid-century design. How do you position Danish modern, let's say in comparison to French mid-century or Italian, in terms of the collectible market?
I think it's really, I mean, look, in general speaking, when it comes to the secondary market for all of 20th century design, French design, certain aspects of French design are always going to be the most expensive. And that's despite the ups and downs of all the little micro markets over the years. But then once you get beyond the certain sort of like, Americans and their Francophilic tendencies and these sort of powerhouse designers through the French decades, then, I think that Danish design, American design, and Italian design are all relatively similar and on a similar plane of value in that they go up and down. Individual designers have their moments up and down. And at the same time, the most important thing that's really happened over the past 30 years is a increase in connoisseurship, which is such an important word here. The connoisseurship amongst the auction house experts, the museum curators, the gallerists and dealers, and the collectors to recognize that in a market as vast as Danish design, there not only are there iconic models, but there are, of course, many, many different versions sometimes of the same iconic model.
Connoisseurship is really important, and some people have this misconception that when it comes to Danish modern, there is really no connoisseurship. And I want to start with this. So Peter, let's talk about grade A, B, and C. And let's look at these examples.
The big overstuffed easy chair, that would certainly be on my sort of A list of Danish design. It's the Tired Man chair by Flemming Lassen, a chair that was designed in 1936 and actually sort of precedes the mid-century thing. That is today probably among the most collectible pieces of Danish design. So that would be on the A list. And at the bottom, we will have a great sofa by Cor Klint. That would be on my B list. It's not as such a rare piece, but it's a piece that when it has the patina, the original leather from Niger, goats from Niger, as in this image, then it's collectible in the sense of it certainly be on a B list. And then you have a very, very nice Paul Kjærholm PK9 chair. Again, a piece that has been reduced in quantity, but again, if it has the right leather, the right patina, the right appearance, then it can be a nice collectible, a nice piece to buy, not at a huge sum of money, but certainly collectible.
A lot of people, like my clients, really love that chair. Everybody loves that chair. Raise your hand. Who doesn't want to have that chair? Well, I said, who doesn't want to have that chair? Okay, so we have 4 examples here. Can you say something about them?
Yes. So this is maybe for some of you, basically the same chair, but it's actually 3 different chairs that you see up here. At the top, we have a very, very nice early example of the Wegner swivel chair. The nice wooden back and the leather seat and the small caster wheels. So this would be the highly collectible. It's the original version. It's how it was supposed to be when it was shown in the Cabinet Makers exhibition in the 50s. And this is the right one. So then you have one with a more simple base. That is a later version from the original maker, cabinet maker Johannes Hansen. This is from late 60s into the 70s, and it's a completely different value. It's original in the sense that it's from the first original maker, but it's obviously in a different chair. It's about at best a third of the other one. And then the final example is a re-edition of the Wegner chair. It's still one of the few pieces that are made by hand by P.P. Möbler, which has taken up the tradition of the handmade Wegner furniture. But it's a chair that you can buy today, and as such, it's not collectible in the sense of the first one. In terms of auction prices, I would say that the Wegner chair, the first one, could fetch an example like this, which fetch something like maybe $20,000 to $30,000. That would be the sort of range that I would see it in Denmark. The other version with a more simple base would be around something like $8,000 to $10,000. And the last one would be, if it came up, if something like, what, 4,000 or 5,000.
James, this is my surprise to you. Let's talk about Peter Moos.
Peter Moos is a Danish, maker, is I guess the word I would use, a true blue cabinet maker who is the closest, I think, that the Danes have to the American studio tradition of Nakashima, Castle, Escherick, etc. In that he was truly making one-off works for, his clients and his patrons, and there was not a sense of real mass production for the vast majority of his designs. And so you're not going to find Peter Moos in American interiors. Peter Moos has become a wildly popular and highly collected designer, with all the big records mostly being set at Brun Rasmussen. I had a couple pieces at Sotheby's, but you're finding it in Copenhagen. you're not finding it in a living room in, the Chicago suburb or something like that.
Yeah, he had his workshop in the central Copenhagen, and it was up under the roof. And he made a construction where he had a bed that he could slide out on the roof. So he was lying out there looking into the stars at night. And to get
Even in
inspiration.
winter? Even in the winters?
I don't know. Maybe so. He was quite a character. When people ordered a piece of furniture by him, you said that there were three things you had to prepare for this. You didn't know when it was going to be finished, and you didn't know what it was going to look like, and you didn't know how much it was going to cost. However, on the last point, you could be pretty certain that it was going to be very expensive and more than you initially agreed for.
Okay, so talking about connoisseurship, Vance, you have recently co-curated a show at Art & Company on Ole Vanscher. How did you get to have this expertise?
Vanscher was from an sort of art historical family. He was very well read. He did a lot of research on even ancient furniture and wrote books on it long before he became known as a designer. When he did design, he found historical models, whether they be Egyptian, Chinese, or English, and he really transformed them and stripped them down to their very basics. And he had a strong collaboration with a couple of the best cabinet makers in Copenhagen.
If we talk maybe about the one single piece of furniture of Danish modern that is so much praised, it's the chieftain chair.
The chieftain chair is probably, as you say, the flagship of sort of Danish modern, designed in 1949 and shown at the Copenhagen Cabinet Makers Guild exhibition that year. The Danish king came by and he sat in it, and then a reporter asked Finn Juhl, should it now be called the king's chair? And he said, no, it should be called the chieftain's chair. He was very inspired by Afrikaner, Finn Juhl. In my view, it's a very un-Danish chair in the sense that it's so huge. It's not common for Danish pieces of furniture to be so potent and big and make such a strong impression, in my view. The chair has been produced ever since it was designed in 1949.
So very powerful and different than any other piece of Danish modern furniture that we know in terms of the design. But can you say something about connoisseurship?
It's a very good example of connoisseurship here. Finn Juhl pieces you generally want to have from the original cabinet maker, who's called Niels Vaader. And he was the one who made Finn Juhl pieces from 1937 and up until they parted in 1960, 59, I think it was. Is it stamped? That's the question I get again and again. Is it stamped? Is it stamped? And they want to have this stamp from cabinet maker Niels Vaader on the piece. Actually, that in itself is only something you put on when you started exporting the pieces to the United States. So it's not a sign of authenticity as such. But if you can, it's better that it's there.
James, you have recently placed this chair in an American museum collection.
Again, it goes back to when Peter was talking about the history of Finn Juhl's chieftain chair and all of the varying cabinet makers. America has actually received almost one from all of them over the years, in that there were original examples that were exported to the United States in the early 1950s. This particular one is from that early group that was built by Niels Vaader and was sold this particular one was sold at George Jensen at the store in New York. But now this is in the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. And I just want to say one quick thing. It's kind of fascinating. American museums are really, really, really behind the eight ball when it comes to collecting Danish design.
I want a couple of words on new directions in collecting Danish modern today. And I have a couple of examples, if you can elaborate on them. And James, you too?
Yeah, well, let's start out with something completely un-Danish. If you wonder where Restoration Hardware got their inspiration from, then you can probably look at this piece. But this is actually Denmark at its most exotic in 1941. This is some of the things that the market is trying to sort of pick up on the moment. They want to have something that is unknown, that is before sort of Danish modern was established. And then we find pieces like this. So this is something I couldn't, it mostly looked like a French piece from the 1940s. And that's actually also where it went when we sold it. But it's just a reminder that even though we talk about Danish modern as a style, there are always exceptions. There are always things that are very different, and this is one of them. Yeah, this is Flemming Lassen, the guy with the tired man, the chair that we saw a little while ago. He designed this sofa in 1935, and again, this is what today is on the A list of Danish modern. We'd never seen it. Then this one came out, and we fetched a very good price for that. And then a few others came out, but probably just a handful have been made of these pieces back in the 1930s.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of the market, at auction, starting in the late 1990s, it wasn't something you would ever see, because people had no idea what it was at that point. So, I mean, that's the thing. Now that the decades have gone by, they've found, everyone's expertise is much higher, so now people understand what it is.
And I want, before we taking a couple of questions from the audience, I would like to just say something about Brun Rasmussen. One of the things that I found amazing, James, I don't know if you know that when you buy a piece from them, they actually have containers. Can you say something about that? Are you aware of that?
Oh, I'm very aware of it. It's amazing because our galleries bought a few pieces from Brun Rasmussen, and yeah, their shipping procedures are like remarkable compared to like the piece in Christie's in terms of.
So you
the
buy
deal,
a piece of
yeah.
furniture and you pay like $200 to ship it to New York.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So that's amazingly valuable, as well as the fact that they get an access, you guys get an access to very original homes. Yeah. And how does this really happen? Because I know that Danish people really like to hold on of their furniture, of their parents' furniture, so when do they get to sell that?
Well, I mean, occasionally people have to move and they split up or someone dies, and then we are often asked to come out. And we are still very, very lucky that we are sort of going into the sort of first owners of many of these things. So it's sometimes I'm going into home and they have these pieces from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they come to us and they sell them. And
so you have a representation here in New York, and that makes it. And this is Sandra, who is the representative. So I would like to take a couple of questions from the audience. Any question? So let's start here, John.
Just out of curiosity, do you have any idea of your typical sale? What percentage stays in Denmark or in Europe versus what comes to the United States?
Okay. The percentage that stays in Denmark is probably around 2%. So it's all leaving Denmark. The Danes are to some extent blind of their own inheritance. It's so much around them that they don't, to some extent, notice it. And that's going back to where I said in the beginning. A lot of it goes to New York. I would say about 30% of all our pieces are going to the States. Then there were a lot of clients in Japan, to some extent China, and then rest of Europe. So it's all leaving Denmark, and one day we will maybe be left only with IKEA.
Okay, more questions? Eric?
Yeah, hi. Who would you say is the new generation of people that might be making collectible Scandinavian design now that we should keep our eyes on in the next 50 years?
I'm sometimes asked that question, and maybe I'm too focused on the past. But going back to where I said early on, I look at this period in history in Denmark as one of the few times where we were, if not the best to do something, certainly among the best. The other period probably being shipbuilding in the age of the Vikings. So honestly, I don't think there is going to be a new golden age of Danish design as such. I think that the designers today in Denmark are obviously educated with this craftsmanship tradition, but the marketplace is more global, and they sort of mix with manufacturers around the world. So you don't have this symbiotic relationship with the designer and maker that, in my view, has been one of the forces behind it.
Thank you.
So we're going to take the last question.
Well, I just want to mention that if somebody buys Finial and it's really want to buy some good examples, that they need to be very careful because there was a production in America of Finial that was made by Baker.
Absolutely, and you're a man who really knows what he's doing too out there in the audience, who has seen it all. The Baker furniture, Finn Yule was, he took the dramatic step of signing a contract with Baker, which was in Grand Rapids, right? I think Michigan. And you do see the chieftain chair made by Baker in the 1950s. In fact, the drawings of it are in the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum, along with the model number 45 and a couple of the other ones as well. A distinctly lower value range, yes.
So I would like to thank you all for being here. And I want to thank our amazing speakers, Peter, James, and Vance, and to Brun Rasmussen, and let's have some drinks. Thank you.